Hello and welcome everybody. Monica, Empower Your Health, Empower Your Life TV. At Empower TV, we connect you to health and wellness resources so that you can empower yourself and create the life you want and the life you love. So let's go. And today we have a truly outstanding guest, and I cannot wait for the conversation, and I cannot wait to learn. And also, if you are a mom, if you are a family member, if you're looking forward to being a mom, if you have a mom, I think you are the right audience for us today, because we're going to be talking about something profoundly crucial for the health of not just individuals, but the family and the entire society. So let me welcome our guest today, Lynn Schulte, and she has been a pelvic health physical therapist for over 30 years and is the founder of the Institute for Birth Healing. She has been helping moms heal from all the issues women experience after birth and is now teaching courses to bodyworkers to help them to do the same. She found common birth patterns that show up in the pelvis after birth and knows how to effectively release these patterns. Knowing we are more than just our bodies, Lynn works on all levels, physically, energetically, and spiritually, with women to help them access their full potential, right? That's what we're talking about, empowerment. She also teaches body workers how to work with the energy of the body and how to access and use your intuition in your bodywork sessions. She offers a certification process to help birth professionals become birth healing practitioners. Wow. I'm so excited to hear more about your philosophy, your approach, what you do, and your projects, and how you assist and help so many people. Because, when I was kind of reflecting on this conversation, what came to me is that the health of the mother is the foundation, not just for the health of the children, but also the health of the entire family and communities and society. So you are really going into the core of what is so important for us to be healthy. Well, welcome, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Monica. I so appreciate any chance I get to share this knowledge with others and really let moms know. Unfortunately, in our society, we do a beautiful job of taking care of the baby and the mama during pregnancy, but then once that baby arrives, all the attention goes to the baby, and then the mom is just kind of like left alone. You maybe get one session with your OB at 6 weeks, but it's pretty much how you doing, and there's no real assessment done. And it truly is my dream and goal that any person giving birth is seen by one of my certified birth healing specialists, because over the years, I've just mainly been working with pregnant and postpartum moms, and I found these common patterns that happen in the body when we're pregnant, and depending on how that baby came out, it leaves an imprint, an impact on our bodies. And I've trained my professionals, the people that come and take my courses, they know what to look for, and they know how to effectively address these patterns and release them from the body. And it's so, so important that moms get this care, because there's too many women after the birth. Birth is meant to be this natural process that happens in our body. And unfortunately, our medical society has kind of medicalized birth, and they intervene a lot. And those interventions definitely have impact on the body. And I think too many women, after having, given birth, are actually really traumatized, and their body's traumatized, and they don't realize it. And, I say there's, capital T trauma, which we know, people know they've been traumatized with capital T trauma, but there's also lowercase t trauma that happens in birth. And sometimes, people aren't aware that their body is actually been traumatized by the experience of it. And, it's happened over and over in my clinic. I'll, talk to a mom about their birth, and so how was your birth? And they'll be like, oh, it's fine. It's great. And it's not until we get on the table and I start working with the tissues that the tears come up, and they're like, oh, I remember that happened. right? Because after that little one comes out of us, all of our focus is on that baby. And we lose, sight of what really happened to us. And that's where this work is so powerful because we know what to look for. We know these patterns and we know how to address those patterns. And I was just thinking earlier today, as I was preparing for this too, is that, I see a lot of people come to me and they've seen multiple practitioners and they've been working with them for a year or more. And they finally come to me and I'm addressing the trauma in the body and nobody else is addressing that trauma. And to me, the trauma in the body is like the body's held its breath and it's in this state of freeze. And it's like, and you're walking around, you're functioning, but your body's still doing this. And now you have all these practitioners trying to manipulate and do something to the body that's like, and so the very first thing we do is just help clear the trauma and release the trauma and get mom's nervous system calm back down and get them breathing again, getting their all their tissues breathing again. And then we can make effective change. So until we address the trauma that's being held in those tissues, it's really, really challenging to make changes in the body and the tissues.
Yes, thank you for bringing that out. That's crucially important. And I think exactly it's not a part of our conversation within the medical system.
Yeah.
Get the baby out, clean up the mother and let's go home. And then, she is left with the baby to care and to work really hard. And my question as a therapist and knowing women who have given birth recently, what I see is that there's so much work, so much responsibility. It's so overwhelming for many. And I believe that also because, if we are in a traumatized state, it's really hard to take care of our reality around us.
Yeah.
So my question is always, if I put myself in the shoes of the young mother, how do you talk to people? How do you help them understand that they really will benefit, and not just them, but the entire family will benefit if the woman takes that time to really look at where she is, to really take that time to devote to herself and her own healing. So
it's easier for some, harder for others. Really depending on our belief system and the environment that we grew up in and what our moms did. We tend to pattern what we saw. And so if our moms didn't take care of themselves, then it's harder for us to take care of ourselves. But what I really appreciate, I love working with my pregnant mamas because then I have an opportunity to actually educate them and let them know that it's really important for them to come back and see me, even if they don't have any issues going on in their body. They feel totally fine in their body. Because even when I've had clients who have come back and they, birth was great, baby, came out no problem, and I feel great in my body, their pelvic floor muscles still aren't functioning at 100%. There's things that happen as that baby comes on out. And one of the patterns I find is that the bladder gets smushed off to the side as that baby's head's coming through. And the bladder and the uterus, they're the kingpin for the health of the pelvis. And if they're not happy, then your pelvic floor muscles aren't happy. And so even someone who's like, no, I'm great, my muscles are working fine, they come in and we still do the release work and we, still close up the bones from that open birthing pattern. And we can definitely get a stronger contraction going on in their core, in their pelvic floor muscles. And they're like, oh, wow, yeah, that is different. So I say once a baby comes out of the pelvis here, once a baby comes through here, there's no sense of normalcy in your body anymore. You've lost that, what the body really feels like. And I can't tell you the number of women who have gotten off my table and go, oh my God, why did I wait so long to come in? Because they just feel so much more put together. They feel things can activate so much easier. And the pelvic floor muscles, the pelvic floor muscles and your transverse abdominis muscle, which is the lower belly muscle that, it wraps around the entire belly, but it starts in the back by your spine and goes forward to backwards. So it's this big corset, and it helps stabilize our spine. And that muscle and your pelvic floor muscles with a vaginal birth are the two muscles that get so stretched out from birth. And so what's really critical for people to understand is that after birth, if we don't activate our core if we don't get our core activating in a supportive strategy, that it's going to cause problems down the road. And what I mean by that is that I want anyone listening into this talk and put your hand on your lower belly and cough. And what happens to your belly when you cough? Does it go out or does it come in? And ideally, we want it to come in. But if it's going out, that means that transverse abdominis muscle is not coming to the party. And your upper muscles, so we have these oblique muscles. So oblique muscles come in from the side. They come in this angle and this angle. And then we have that transverse muscle that comes around the middle of the belly. And it's the deepest layer. Well, that transverse abdominis muscle gets stretched out the most. And those oblique muscles, they don't get as stretched out. So it's easier for muscles more so than your transverse abdominis muscle after birth. And so a lot of women start activating and just working on their core right away. But if they don't realize that they have to get that transverse abdominis muscle back into the game, then they become what we call oblique dominant. And that's where your upper muscles, these muscles kick in and they start clamping down. They clamp that rib cage down, which causes that lower belly to jut out, which actually causes more pressure on the bladder and the uterus. And so that eventually, over time, is going to lead to stress incontinence and potentially prolapse of your pelvic organs. Prolapsing means that they start falling down and they create a heaviness in your pelvic space. And that is just from the way you are using your core, the strategy that you have developed after birth to help keep yourself strong. And it's so important that we make sure that we get that transverse abdominis muscle activating and kicking in prior to those oblique muscles. So when we go to activate, ideally we start from the pelvic floor first, and the pelvic floor then activates, and the transverse abdominis and the pelvic floor muscles, they're wired together. They're meant to engage together. And we want them, so if you activate the pelvic floor muscles to contract, then the transverse should come in automatically. And then to me, it's like zipping up a zipper that when you draw your belly back, the lower part comes in first, then the middle part, then the upper part. And what I see a lot of happening after birth is that the upper part is kicking in first, and the lower part's not even really coming to the party. Okay. And so that's the strategy that we need to make sure is working correctly post-birth. And there's so many things. I have an intravaginal protocol that I teach my practitioners to do. It's like, if you do these techniques in this order, you get a much greater pelvic floor muscle contraction. And I tell you what, there's like a 50% improvement in strength after doing that protocol. And so it's really, really helpful that when you know what to look for and what to do, you can make such effective change in the function of the tissue. And it's so exciting. And that's what helps to like guide and lead this whole core activation strategy that we need to get on board for these mamas. So I think there's two main things that moms need to get checked out after birth. One is, how well are those pelvic floor muscles functioning? And then what strategy are they using for their core so that they don't have any long-term consequences when they turn 60, 70, 80 years old, and now they start peeing their pants, or now their organs are falling down. And I truly believe that we can minimize the number of prolapses and stress incontinence incidents that we have later on in life by addressing the issues that happened after birth. And, unfortunately, in our society, people don't like to focus in on prevention. They only work on something and, and if it's in pain or broken. So I think the message I want moms to understand is that you may not have pain, you may think things are working well, but it would still benefit you to get checked, to make sure that the strategy that you are utilizing is going to offer you the best support for the long term of your pelvic health.
Wonderful. Thank you. You answered a lot of the questions that I had, because I think you're painting that picture, why would I be spending my time now going to a therapist if I'm so busy because I have a new baby?
Right, right.
Think 20, 30, 40 years in the future, who do you want to be? But also, what I got from you saying is that oftentimes, we say I was pregnant and now I'm not, like I cannot exercise anymore. I'm not strong enough. I just lost all my strength. And, life's not the same after pregnancy. It's not necessary. It doesn't have to be like that.
Not at all. You just need to figure out how to activate your core again. That lack of strength. And another issue that, happens during pregnancy is that there's a separation of your abdominal muscles that we call diastasis recti. And that's where your six-pack muscle, the muscles that you only see on so few people, it's celebrated as that uterus is growing. And so for anybody who's currently pregnant, or if you are in that postpartum healing stage, you really want to avoid any doming in the midline. So if you see your belly as you lean backwards, if you see any tenting or doming of your tissues in the midline, we want to avoid that, because that's what's causing that more and more of that separation. And if we can minimize that during pregnancy, and we minimize it by watching our posture and watching our pressures and how we activate our core, we need to activate and pull and hug that baby in before we activate and do something. Okay. So we really want to avoid any doming of the belly during pregnancy and then immediately after when we are healing, so that we can allow those tissues to heal and to come back together again and to shorten back up. And there's something that I teach. I have a Confidence in Your Core, Pelvic Floor, and More online course for anybody listening in that gives you all the steps that you should take after being pregnant to help heal yourself. If you're pregnant currently, take it now, because I also talk about some effective pushing techniques for labor. And if you can take it afterwards, and it doesn't matter how old your babies are, you can still take this course and learn how to get your core activating. There's a 6-phase exercise protocol that I walk you through to make sure you're doing it in an appropriate way. And then there's other exercises and stretches and things that are really important to help get your body back together again. So you can find that on my website. And I just really encourage people, because it's just so important. You need to release your oblique muscles, because the oblique muscles, those are those muscles that I said were like this on the sides of our belly. Well, they get tight during pregnancy, and that tightness pulls those recti muscles apart. And so postpartum, we've got to lengthen them again, because that will help bring those recti muscles together again. So we need to make sure that we lengthen those muscles. And when I do this on my postpartum moms, they're like, oh my gosh, that feels so good. So that can really help start the healing process for diastasis. And, my true goal is to help women avoid it in the first place. And so there's a couple of things that we can do in our movements and in our postures. But sometimes it just depends on how big that baby is and how much space a woman has in her trunk and her belly to be able to carry that baby. If we're carrying multiples, those are all factors that we really can't change. But the way you're moving and the way you're activating that core during pregnancy, you can help try to minimize that strain by just engaging and hugging your babies towards your belly before you go to sit up or before you go to stand up or, do anything of exertion.
Fantastic. Yes. So we are going to share the website and your resources so that, whoever is listening can actually access that. And that would be, I highly recommend if you're just thinking of getting pregnant. I think this is the best time to start.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You cannot wait too long. You just cannot wait too long. It's not gonna help anything. But so that's great because, my question on my mind is that not everybody can come to your clinic.
Right.
And it's not always easy to find a therapist. It's not always easy to find somebody that is trustworthy and who knows what they're doing.
Right.
I think we still don't have those networks. And so what I'm hearing from you do offer a lot of information, a lot of resources for women to actually engage with online.
We do have a directory on our website. It's December of 21 and it should go live in January. Our website or our directory this year crashed, so we had to build a new one. And so we're still trying to get all of our practitioners to put all their information in there, but that should be going live in January of 2022. So you can go to my website and check out the directory and see if there is a practitioner near you. Another thing to keep in mind that some of my practitioners actually offer distance healing sessions. So we can get on Zoom, and it works best if you do have a partner there, because then we can instruct the partner in what to do to help your body. There's some exercises that you can do. One of the aware of that I don't think this is something that I've just discovered working on the thousands of postpartum women that I have over the years. And one of the things is we need to understand that as that baby comes into the pelvis, the bones of our pelvis does this to widen this pelvic inlet. And then once the baby gets to those pelvic floor muscles, then the bones do the opposite. And these sit bones and the sacrum move backwards. And these open up in order for the baby to come on out. Now, depending on what position you're in, if you're laying on one side, this side's not going to move as much. So this side's going to move more to get that baby out. Okay. Or if you put one leg up, or, just depending. The one question I ask every single person that I work on postpartum is, what position were you in when the baby came out? Because that's going to guide me into helping these bones come back together again, because not every person, these bones don't come back to the midline all the time. Okay. And so they get stuck in what I call the open birthing pattern, where the tailbone's backwards and these sit bones are out to the side. And, if like sometimes sitting feels like uncomfortable, it feels like you're out of balance, that's your sit bones aren't in the proper place. They're too far apart. They need to come back to the midline. If one feels more cattywampus than the other, that one's probably more affected, more pushed out to the side than the other one. There is a thing that I find that where the pelvis gets like stuck, completely pushed out to the side. So the sacrum gets jammed backwards and the entire pelvis is just widened. And we know how to help bring those bones back together again. And there is an exercise that you can do using your adductors, your leg muscles in resistance to help close those bones up. And I put that on my YouTube channel. So Institute for Birth Healing is the channel that on YouTube you can go and look how to close the bones after birth, or an exercise to close the bones after birth, something like that is the title of that. So please check that out and do that exercise right after birth. And that'll just help bring those bones back together, back to their normal place, which will then allow your pelvic floor muscles to activate a little bit better and make pain more comfortable. Because when the bones are apart like this, the pelvic floor muscles attach to these bones. My hands are the pelvic floor muscles. So if these bones are out to the side, these pelvic floor muscles are on stretch. And they can't activate when they're on stretch. And for intercourse to be able to penetrate, those muscles, those tissues need to be able to expand. Well, if they're already expanded because they're being pulled apart, they don't have the give to allow insertion to happen. So we need to help bring those bones back together and help those tissues to relax. So then we can allow insertion to happen. Scar tissue can also cause a problem. So here's a pelvis with the pelvic floor muscles attached to it. So here are your sit bones. So if you can see, if these sit bones are out to the side, can you see what it does to these muscles right there? And then if we've torn during childbirth, usually the tear happens somewhere down in here. And that tearing can also prevent that tissue from expanding for intercourse. And so releasing that scar tissue by just putting your fingers in here and kind of massaging it with your thumb, your finger internally, your thumb externally, you can kind of feel that thickened tissue in there. That's your scar tissue. And if you can just kind of compress it and hold it and wait for it to melt, that can help soften that scar tissue. So then the tissues can expand for penetration, for sex. So, it's also, I just want to emphasize the importance that, if something is painful, there's a reason. And a lot of doctors will just give you, just give it time. Well, I'm here to say that no, go get help. If intercourse is painful, I say, especially if you tore, if intercourse is painful, it should get better each successive time you attempt to have intercourse if it's going to. If it remains the same, then your muscles and tissues are locked and they need help releasing it in order for that pain to get better. And, a lot of times for myself and for the practitioners I've trained, a lot of times they can get really effective treatment in one session. Like I've been able to let people have intercourse because I also know how to work with the trauma that's being held in these tissues. And so if you're working on that scar tissue and it's really painful, one thing I want you to check in with yourself is there any emotion being held in that tissue? Emotion can be held in that tissue, that scar tissue, and it thickens it and it keeps it held together. And so if you can just honor and recognize that emotion and let it release, then the tissue's just like, you felt that, Monica?
Yeah.
Yeah. Same goes for C-section scarring too. Scar tissue is affected by emotion. And if that scar tissue was traumatic, or, if the cesarean birth was traumatic for you, that emotion can get stuck in that tissue. I had a client come to see me for 5 years. For 5 years, she had lower abdominal pain from her C-section scar. And it started immediately after the birth. And she went on and had 2 more surgeries because they thought something else was going on in there. And when I just put my fingers on the tissues, there was an emotion stuck in there. There was trauma from the cesarean birth. And we just cleared that off and her pain went away. And so I wish more doctors understood the importance of trauma and how that can really affect our pain response in our body. And, I had a client come to see me who told me the most traumatic birth. The birth wasn't too bad, but everything that happened to her afterward was just trauma, 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 trauma. And I'm in here, I'm listening to those stories in my head. I'm going, oh my God, I'm going to find so much in her body and her tissues. And I got her on the table and I started listening and feeling into her tissues, and there was nothing there. In fact, the only thing that I found was something prior to her pregnancy. That was the only thing being held in her tissues. And I was just like, what did you do? And she said, I reprocessed my birth 3 times with my doula and my partner. And I talked about what I was feeling throughout the entire process. And that was the key point there, what she was feeling. Because during trauma, the event, it gets overwhelming. It's too much for us to take in. And so we disconnect from what's actually happening to us. And the emotion, the feeling is too much that we can't feel it all. And so that unprocessed emotion gets stuck in our tissues. And if we can just go back and really be with whatever that emotion was, it's really helpful to have that loving support of your partner and your doula there, or a therapist. Anyone who's taken one of my advanced postpartum healing trainings knows how to work with the trauma in the body and help to release it. But the more we can honor the emotions, the more it releases, and the tissues can just breathe again, and they normalize. And so that, to me, that story was really, really impactful for me, to realize how much those emotions are so important in releasing, to release that trauma. And there was another point I was going to make about the emotions. Oh, I say that in my sessions, it's more rare for someone not to cry on my table than it is for someone to cry. So, I really just hold space to allow my clients to feel whatever it is that they're feeling, or what's being held in those tissues. And I had a client who came in, and I was working on her pelvic floor muscles, and she had tension on the left side of her pelvis. And I was doing everything I could to try to help them to let go. And she actually started tearing up on the table and then quickly shut it down. And I didn't feel called to, call her out on it. I just kind of let it be. But man, nothing I did let those muscles release at all. And so we get done, and I was like, I'd really like to see you again, because I think the muscles still need some support and some help in there. And she sits up off the table and she goes, "Ha, my friends told me you were going to make me cry and you didn't." And I went, I got it. She kept the emotion in. She didn't let it come to the surface. It wanted to. It was starting to, but she shut it back down. And that's why so it's just so important for us to really make sure that we address those emotions. I say the pelvic floor muscles, these are the sponges for our emotions. Like, our emotions just get held in these tissues. And so a lot of times when we're doing intravaginal work, so I just work with a gloved finger. I don't use a speculum or anything. And just with my finger, I'm in here palpating these muscles and tissues. Excuse me. I have a cold. So, it's different than seeing an OBGYN, because they use the speculum. We don't use speculums. We actually want to feel with our finger what those tissues are feeling like, and feel what those contractions are feeling like in here. And these muscles back in here are the ones that are the most important for birth. We want to make sure these muscles have flexibility prior to going into birth, because if these muscles are too tight, then these bones can't open like they need to for birth. And so I've trained a bunch of midwives, and they've reported back to me that if a birth has, labor stalling and baby's not coming in and out, if they go in and release these pelvic floor muscles, babies just come right on out. So I really call those pelvic floor muscles the stoplight for birth.
Okay, stoplight for, okay. Thank you so much for sharing all that. There's a lot of information, and it's fantastic. And I'm really, really happy to hear that you offer so much online, YouTube and your website and the courses, because, this is the way to go. Even if you don't know how to find a therapist, it's at your fingertips. There's there's really no value at all in waiting, ever.
No, none.
So question that comes to mind. So can you tell more about C-sections, and why is that so important? Because it's a different birth process.
Yes.
Why is it important to address it?
I say with cesarean births, it's so important after the birth and after the scar heals that we massage that tissue. Okay. Because not women aren't being told to do this. And what ends up happening is that scar tissue forms, and scar tissue forms everywhere around the wound, and it connects to everything and anything in its way, trying to heal that open wound. And until we learn to move, does the scar tissue learn how to lay down? Well, in an arm, where we're bending and straightening it, the scar tissue learns to lay down in this linear pattern. but in the belly, there's no 3D movement that we do to really help that scar tissue to learn how to lay down. And so that's where our massaging comes in to help make sure that those tissues stay mobile. And if not, it just kind of gets glued all together in there. And so there's three issues that can happen. Sometimes a person after a C-section will feel some pulling pain or some irritation from the cesarean, the surgery right away. And that's a sign that you just need to get in there and release the scar tissue, release the fascia, the connective tissue that might have been pulled too much. You know, it's amazing what they do to have to get that baby out. So the tissues where they open that up really goes through a lot of stretching and pulling and tugging. And so there's a lot of tension being put on those tissues. And so you can, if the scar is not well healed yet and you're feeling that pulling, you can work around the scar tissue and you can try to release the tissue, you know, around it within pain tolerance. Okay. It's very, very hard for us to cause pain, to cause problems, because it's usually painful and we stop. So listen to your body. Don't create pain as you're doing this. A burning, stretching pain is different than pain, though. So you need to be able to differentiate from that. But the three main issues that happen after a cesarean birth is, one is that you can get bladder frequency. So this is how the bladder and the uterus sit within our pelvis. And if you think about this uterus being big with baby, they actually cut right down in here to get the baby out. So then that shrinks back down and it sits right on top of this bladder. And so now we've got scar tissue forming on the bladder. Has receptors in its walls, and the bladder, it fills up and then it shrinks. So it actually is flat when there's no urine in there, and then it becomes this ball when there is urine in there. Well, if scar tissue is inhibiting the ability of that bladder to expand, it's going to be sending signals to the brain like, I'm full, you got to go, you got to go. And so you're going to feel like you have to go to the bathroom every 20 minutes, even though you just went. And it's just the scar tissue and they're inhibiting this bladder from being able to expand. So when you get in and you massage that scar tissue, it allows the bladder to expand fully and you stop having to feel like you have to pee so frequently. The next thing that happens is that deep thrusting pain with intercourse. Okay. So, you know, this is the vaginal canal. This is where the penis comes in. And for intercourse, all these tissues have to move up and down. And if we're hitting a brick wall of scar tissue, you know, so that's the deep thrusting pain, because these tissues can't get out of the way. So we need to release the scar tissue so then we have that free movement for deep thrusting. And then the last thing is that there's low back pain. The uterus has attachments from the front to the back, to the sacrum back here. They're uterosacral ligaments. And I have not met a C-section scar that is even on one side, or that's not tighter on one side more than the other. You feel that, Monica, too? Yeah.
Yes.
And so if the scar tissue in your belly is tighter, pulling it forward on one side, the sacrum's going to come along with that to help protect the organs. And so we need to release that C-section scar so the uterus can get back into its midline and take that pressure off that sacrum. So when that tightness is in there and that sacrum is getting pulled forward, then it can't do what it needs to do and it causes back pain. And I had a girlfriend who has the same age kiddos as mine. They're now 21 and 19. But back when they were like 6 and 8, she was getting ready to go camping, and her back went out on her, and she, you know, didn't think she was going to be able to go. But she came in to see me, and I just massaged her C-section scar, and she got off the table and she was like ready to go, and she went camping the next day. 2 years later, she had knee surgery. and she was getting ready to go camping again, and the back went out on her. I think she has an issue with camping, but she comes in to see me because her back is hurting. She's trying to go camping the next day or that weekend, and I'm like, okay, well, your knee's out of whack because you've been walking around with she had ACL surgery, and so for 6 months she's been hobbling around. So I adjusted her pelvis, I adjusted her knee or leg or hip, and all this stuff. And I saw her the next day at a school picnic, and I was like, so how you doing? She goes, no, I'm still in pain. And I never worked on your C-section scar. So I laid her down on a picnic table and I released her C-section scar. And she gets off the table and she goes, oh, yeah, great. It's gone. And she was able to go camping that weekend. So to me, that was the importance. That really showed me the importance of that C-section scarring. And this person, my friend, she has a big rotund belly. And so it's a little bit harder to get down deeper in there to fully release all that scar tissue in there. And so, but I've showed her, I'm like, when your back starts hurting, you get in here and you massage this. And she tells me it works every time. And she had been seeing chiropractors for years and years and years, and nobody was addressing her C-section scar. So those are the important things to keep in mind if you've had a cesarean birth, is you may not feel anything now, but 10 to 15 years down the road, you might start developing any of those 3 issues. And you need to massage your C-section scar. But by then, a lot of practitioners aren't really thinking about that C-section scar as the culprit. And it is usually.
Yes, awesome. And it can be a 5-minute therapy.
Exactly.
Getting in there and just releasing it, and all that pain's going away. Amazing,
yeah.
right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And I have a video on my YouTube channel. Institute for Birth Healing is the channel, on what I described here, but how to do that. So very simplistic, very easy to do yourself. Now, I do want to just make note for those women, those people who aren't able to touch their C-section scar, that's a sign that was probably a traumatic event for you, and that there might still be trauma left in those tissues. And for that, I would encourage you to work with I do long distance work, and Landy Peak is another one of my practitioners. She does a lot of birth trauma work with mamas all over the country. And so that is an option. I worked with a mama who, wanted my help on her belly and making sure that it was activating right. And we were doing it over Zoom. And actually, I laid her down and I was watching her and I was like, wait a minute, we need to go back. There was birth trauma in there. And she didn't realize it. And after we released and worked with it and released that trauma, she was like, oh my gosh, she had a much greater connection to that area again. So when we've been traumatized, we kind of disconnect from that area, and it's harder for us to reconnect. So not being able to touch your scar is a sign that there may be some trauma in there. So please just honor that. And, if you can, replay your birth in a new way, or just go over and talk about it with someone. Now, it's really important that if you are going to relive your birth, that you don't just talk about it, well, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. That's not going to get you any healing. You really want to get into what you were feeling and what you're noticing. What do you notice in your body as that was happening? Our tissues know no time and space. So even if it's been 20 years since that surgery or since that cesarean birth, it's still held in those tissues. So you can still work on it and release it. It's never too late to heal from birth, no matter what you're dealing with.
That is, yes. Thank you so much for mentioning that. That is so important, because even if it's 30, 40 years, it's nothing's lost. We can release it in 5 minutes and just allow those emotions to come up. It doesn't take time. I always feel like, the body doesn't count time the way, the mind does.
Right, yeah.
Completely different process. The body lives in the present.
Yes.
So you're reliving the trauma constantly until you really are able to address it and release it. So that's huge. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Yeah. And to kind of look at the little bigger picture, and I just want to, all the information you're giving is fantastic, because we need to know those techniques. We need to know how to do that. And it's not difficult. It's not complicated. You can do so much on your own as a patient. Yeah. And in terms of a bigger picture, because you've been a physical therapist for 30 years, And so my question is, where do you see all the perinatal medicine and health going? And what can we do as therapists to direct it in the right direction?
Yeah. I'm really excited to be seeing more and more of the conscious C-sections, the family-centered cesarean births, the gentle cesarean births. I just saw one posted on Facebook this week. The doctors letting the baby kind of crawl out of the belly versus being yanked out. So I think more and more the word is getting out about how conscious that baby is and how the birth process is so important for who we are and how we show up in the world. I would love, we have a long way to go, but we're heading in a good direction. One of my big platforms that I'm really trying to push is this idea that during pregnancy, before we go into labor, we do a beautiful job of taking care of mom and baby during pregnancy, but I wish we did a little bit more on preparing the body for labor and assessing the body for labor. I feel like, there's 3 areas of the body that I like to look at, and it's the abdomen, the pelvis, and the pelvic floor muscles. And I want to make sure that the baby can get into the best position to come on out. And that is because of the uterine ligaments and the abdominal fascia. So we need to assess those. We need to make sure that the bones can have the ability to move and that they're not hardened from impacts and injuries and things. I had a mom come to see me after she had her cesarean birth, 30 plus hours of labor. And she came to see me because she wanted to do a VBAC. And I found her tailbone. This is the pelvic outlet here. Her tailbone was jutted in like this. So, it was sticking straight into the outlet here. Sorry, I'm trying to, yeah. So instead of being straight like this, it was, and it had zero mobility. And I'm like, why was that not found prior to 32 hours of labor? I mean, that is just ridiculous in my mind. And so, I've worked with some women where, I go to palpate the pelvic floor muscles and their tailbone is like 2 inches from the pubic bone, and that's not a lot of space in there for a baby to come on out. And so I told this mom, I'm like, we don't know if that's going to stop a baby from coming on out, but knowing this ahead of time, I'm going to encourage you to never, ever, ever lay on your sacrum during your birth, because your sacrum is going to need to open way far back for that baby to come on out. So if you're laying on the sacrum, that baby's probably going to have a really hard time coming out, right? So be on your side, be on hands and knees. There's other options. And I really hope that women or people who are birthing really talk to their providers about being in different positions other than on our back. Because pressuring on if we're laying on our back here, this needs to come backwards for baby to come on out. And if we're laying on it, now this whole thing has to lift up. Mm-hmm. And so, we got to get women off of our back. And we also, need to get them having more walking epidurals versus, completely numbing out, because then it's harder to get them off their back. I wish we allowed more water bursts. I really think that the water can be very relaxing and help with that opening for women. I wish more hospitals would allow water bursts. I think that's really, really helpful for the whole transition process. So I think we're heading in good direction. I just wish that we could have more assessment of the body prior to labor to make sure that we're not running into those tailbones sticking right in the way. We're making sure that baby's in the best position. I've seen so many women where the baby's head is heading off into this hip. Instead of that, baby's head needs to be right in the midline in order for it to come on out. And if we're starting labor and the baby's head is heading into a hip, how much more effort is it taking for that uterus to help that baby find that inlet, you know? And if a baby's off to the side, that means there's an imbalance in those tissues. So let's get those tissues more balanced. So baby, you know, when we go into labor, that head is midline and ideally in a good position so that we're not dealing with occiput posterior or asynclitic heads and all that kind of stuff. So I really feel a lot of that could be addressed prior to labor.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yes. Thank you so much for mentioning all that. And okay, well, because we're coming up the end of the hour, I would like to invite you to maybe share your, like, the message that you want to give to moms that are expecting or that are preparing to even become pregnant.
Yeah. I think, you know, we need you as a pregnant person or someone who wants to become pregnant, really be aware of what you bring in your body to your birth. And as practitioners, we need to be asking these questions too, because falls and impacts on the bottom or the tailbone or injuries that have happened in the lower abdomen, car accidents, seatbelt injuries, you know, those are all things that can impact the ability for the pelvis to open and for a baby to get into the best position. You know, make sure you check out your pelvic floor muscles. They are the most important structure for birth. That and making sure baby gets into the best position possible. Please check out spinning babies and the mapping of the belly and making sure your baby's in the best position prior to going into labor. Those will all help minimize the amount of time that you are in labor. And then, you know, I highly, highly, highly recommend addressing your fears prior to birth. And that means naming them. Because what ends up happening, I see a lot, is that women, you know, they have a fear and that fear comes to fruition. You know, it comes to manifest because we don't address it. Excuse me. So address your fears. A great thing, exercise, writing, which will help get into your subconscious, unconscious mind, because that is, you know, those limiting beliefs are what's going to impact your birth. And so do some work prior to the labor so that you can come into that process as clear as possible, because whatever you don't address will show up in your labor. So those are all things. And then please get support afterwards. See one of my birth healing specialists. They know exactly what to look for. They know the patterns. They know how to help close things up. Please check out all the videos on my YouTube channel, because those have some really good, there's the exercise to help close your bones up. Think about getting the Confidence in the Core, Pelvic Floor, and More online course on my website that will help you to learn how to activate your core, release the oblique muscles so that you can heal that diastasis faster and get things more supportive in your body. So those are all things that, you know, that's how I would love to support you. I also have a Facebook community group. Institute for Birth Healing Community is a private Facebook group. If you want to join us there, there's moms and practitioners alike. So it's a really great resource and platform for you to ask questions and get support and things like that. And check out my website. Institute for Birth Healing is more for the practitioner side of things. For all of our courses, you can find the Confidence in the Core, Floor, More there. Also, for if you are a practitioner listening into this, I have a holistic treatment of the pregnant body course, holistic treatment of the postpartum body course, and then an advanced treatment of the postpartum body course, which goes more into the energetics and the healing of trauma and working with birth trauma and stuff. So that's more what the advanced is. The pregnant and postpartum course have a ton of techniques in there for you to learn how to do some hands-on body work to help assist your clients in preparing for birth and helping them heal afterwards. And then check out my YouTube channel. There's over 30 videos on that. Yeah, and we're on Instagram too, so follow us there. Yeah, we just want to support you, moms, and you know, you need to know that there is the support out there for you, and that no matter how long it's been, you can still find support. You can still heal. your birth.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that message. You can still heal. It doesn't matter how long it's been. And or
Yes.
it's never too early. That's what I'm getting.
True. Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Monica, I just wanted to mention that the sooner you heal, the less effort and energy it takes, right? If you let something hang out in your body for 10, 20, 30 years, it takes a lot more effort and energy to get those tissues to release and let go of it, because now it thinks that's normal. So if you come in right after birth, and I've trained midwives, they've taken all of my courses, and they do these techniques immediately after birth, and it stays. And so, like the quicker you can get it done after birth, the less it stays in your body and the less effort and energy it takes to get it out of the body. So moms, keep that in mind. Even if you're not having any pain or any problems, you still want to come in and make sure that you get checked out to make sure that your core can activate, and it's activating in a supportive way for your pelvic health.
Fantastic. Yes. So we're going to post the website, and I imagine you can find, there's the directory where people can find practitioners, the YouTube channel, Institute for Birth Healing as well, right?
Yes.
And then the Facebook community. So the resources are really plentiful. There is a lot to choose from and a lot to learn. I think, we just have to take things in our hands and educate ourselves no matter what. It's your life.
And I do want to mention that we have moved our clinic side of things to a new website. So if you're interested in scheduling a session with myself, or I have a colleague, a partner, Jenny Knox, works with me as well, you can schedule a session. You can find us at the center. It's just centerforbirthhealing.com.
Okay,
and there will be a link on the Institute for Birthhealing.com website. But if you're really just wanting a session, and we can do long distance healing, you schedule a Skype session on my website, go to centerforbirthhealing.com. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, we're going to put that in as well. Well, Linda, it's been really a pleasure and an honor to hear your message and all the wealth of knowledge. I am convinced this is going to help so many women and so many moms. I'm looking forward to hearing from anybody about your results, and please contact Lynn. Please reach out and tell your friends.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, beautiful. Thank you.
Spread this word.
So much.
Thank you, Monica, for this opportunity. And thank you, everybody, for listening in. And please do spread the word. Let your friends know. Not a lot of people are talking about these issues. And, especially pain with intercourse after birth, not a lot of people want to talk about that. But that is something that doctors will just tell you, oh, it just takes time. And I'm here to tell you that it could take one session.
One session doesn't take long, doesn't take a lot, but it's profoundly transformational.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And we will connect again, I hope.
Thank you. I would love that. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.